In the heart of Stone Town, Zanzibar, stands the grand coral stone Anglican Cathedral of Christ Church. Inside, visitors are drawn to the high altar adorned with rich carvings and quiet candlelight. But beneath this very altar lies a dark and harrowing secret. The altar was built directly over the spot where the whipping post of the Zanzibar slave market once stood. For centuries, this island was the central hub of a brutal, vast trade in human beings. Hundreds of thousands of Africans were dragged from the deep interior of the continent to this exact location. In this public square, they were stripped, inspected, and sold to the highest bidder. Before they were sold, they were tied to the post and beaten to test their physical endurance. This is the story of the Zanzibar slave market, the last open slave market in the world, and the tragic trade that devastated East Africa. To understand how Zanzibar became the epicenter of this trade, we must look to the year 1840. In that year, Sultan Seyyid Said of Oman made a historic and radical decision. He relocated his imperial capital from Muscat on the Arabian Peninsula to the island of Zanzibar. The Sultan was attracted by Zanzibar's fertile soil, regular rainfall, and its deep natural harbour. The island was also perfectly positioned to control the trade routes of the Western Indian Ocean. Under Said's rule, Zanzibar grew from a quiet fishing outpost into a powerful commercial empire. Merchant ships from the United States, Great Britain, and France arrived at its docks to trade. But the immense wealth that flooded into the Sultan's treasury was built on a dark and human foundation. The growth of Zanzibari trade was completely dependent on the forced labor of enslaved people. The primary driver of Zanzibar's economic explosion was a single spice, cloves. Known as the black gold of the 19th century, cloves were in high demand across the globe. Sultan Seyyid Said ordered that clove trees be planted across Zanzibar and the neighboring island of Pemba. He even decreed that landowners who refused to plant cloves would have their property confiscated. The clove boom created instant, astronomical wealth for the Arab ruling class of the islands. However, clearing the thick forests and harvesting the delicate spice required massive amounts of manual labor. Because local populations could not meet the demand, the elite turned to imports of enslaved Africans. Clove plantations became sites of brutal exploitation where workers labored under a scorching sun. The mortality rate on the plantations was shockingly high, with disease and exhaustion taking lives daily. As the demand for slave labor grew, Zanzibari merchants pushed deeper into the African continent. Massive caravans of traders and armed guards set out from the coast, marching hundreds of miles. The most powerful and feared of these merchants was Hamad bin Muhammad el-Murjabi, known as Tippu Tip. Tippu Tip established a vast trading empire that stretched deep into the Congo basin. Armed with thousands of modern muskets, his forces raided villages and captured local populations. They terrorized local communities, burning crops and destroying homes to prevent resistance. The caravans sought two valuable commodities: ivory and human beings to carry it. Entire regions in Central and East Africa were depopulated by these relentless raids. Society was fractured, and ancient kingdoms were destabilized by the influx of firearms and slave raiders. The interior of the continent became a hunting ground, feeding the insatiable markets of the coast. For the captured Africans, the journey to the coast was a grueling, deadly ordeal. Enslaved captives were chained together by their necks with heavy iron collars and wooden yokes. They were forced to carry massive elephant tusks of ivory, weighing up to 100 pounds, on their shoulders. The march lasted for months, covering hundreds of miles of rugged terrain and thick wilderness. Food and water were strictly rationed, and starvation and dysentery were constant threats. Anyone who fell behind due to illness, fatigue, or injury was viewed as a liability. Traders routinely executed or abandoned those who could no longer walk, leaving them to die by the path. The caravan routes became marked by the bleached bones of those who perished along the way. The final destination on the coast was the town of Bagamoyo, which translates to "lay down your heart." It was a literal reference to the despair of the captives who knew they would never see their homes again. From Bagamoyo, the captives were packed into dhows and shipped across the channel to Zanzibar. Once on the island, they were taken to the central slave market in the heart of Stone Town. Before being sold, the captives were washed, oiled, and dressed in clean clothes to hide their suffering. The market operated as a public spectacle, drawing crowds of buyers, onlookers, and tourists. Enslaved men, women, and children were paraded in a circle while auctioneers called out prices. Buyers examined them like livestock, inspecting their teeth, eyes, and limbs for signs of health. At the center of the market stood a large tree where the whipping post was located. Captives were tied to the post and whipped in front of the crowd to demonstrate their resilience. A slave who endured the whipping without crying out commanded a much higher price. Those who showed weakness were sold cheaply or cast aside, their spirits broken before the auction even ended. Zanzibar was not just a destination for slave labor, but the hub of a vast international network. Thousands of enslaved people sold at Stone Town were loaded onto dhows for export. They were shipped north with the seasonal monsoon winds to the Arabian Peninsula, Persia, and India. In Muscat, Aden, and Basra, Zanzibari slaves were purchased for domestic work, agriculture, and pearl diving. Others were smuggled south to French-controlled sugar islands in the Indian Ocean, like Réunion. This Indian Ocean slave trade operated in parallel to the better-known transatlantic trade. Even as the transatlantic trade began to decline, the East African trade reached its peak in the mid-19th century. It is estimated that between 10,000 and 20,000 slaves passed through Zanzibar every year. The profits from this trade enriched the Sultan and the international merchants who financed the caravans. The history of the East African slave trade is a vital yet often overlooked chapter of our global past. If you believe these stories need to be remembered, please take a moment to subscribe to Unshackled History. Like this video and comment below to help share this documentary with a wider audience. By engaging with our channel, you help us bring these hidden histories to light. Now, let us return to the story and the man who brought the horrors of Zanzibar to the world. In the mid-1800s, the Scottish missionary and explorer David Livingstone travelled deep into East Africa. There, he witnessed the devastating impact of the Arab-led slave trade firsthand. Livingstone was horrified by the abandoned bodies, burned villages, and child captives in chains. He wrote detailed, graphic letters and journal entries describing the atrocities he saw. In one famous letter, he described the trade as the open sore of the world. He believed that the only way to end the trade was through the 3 C's: Christianity, commerce, and civilization. His writings were published in Britain, sparking outrage among the Victorian public. The British public demanded that their government take direct action to stop the slave trade in East Africa. Livingstone's crusade transformed the fight against slavery from a local issue into a global moral cause. Under pressure from the public, the British government turned to its navy to suppress the trade. The Royal Navy's East Africa Squadron was tasked with patrolling the vast Western Indian Ocean. British warships hunted down slave dhows, releasing captured Africans and arresting the crews. Concurrently, British diplomats pressured the sultans of Zanzibar to sign anti-slavery treaties. The Moresby Treaty of 1822 and the Hamilton Treaty of 1845 attempted to restrict the export of slaves. However, these early treaties only banned exports to certain regions, leaving loopholes. Smugglers easily evaded the naval patrols by using shallow coastal waters where large warships could not go. The Royal Navy Squadron was too small to effectively monitor thousands of miles of coastline. Despite the British efforts, the Zanzibar slave market continued to operate openly and profitably. It became clear that the trade would only end if the market itself was shut down. In 1873, the British government decided that diplomatic compromises had to end. They sent a special envoy to Zanzibar, led by the British consul, Sir John Kirk. Kirk was a close friend of David Livingstone and was determined to fulfill his late friend's mission. He delivered a harsh final ultimatum to the new Sultan Barghash bin Said. The Sultan was ordered to close the slave market immediately and ban the transport of slaves. If the Sultan refused, the Royal Navy would launch a total blockade of the island. Barghash feared that a blockade would ruin Zanzibar's economy and destroy his rule. Under the threat of naval bombardment, the Sultan capitulated to the British demands. On June 5, 1873, Sultan Barghash signed the treaty that officially banned the slave trade. That very afternoon, the gates of the great slave market in Stone Town were closed forever. Immediately after the market was closed, the Anglican Church purchased the land. Bishop Edward Steer led the effort to construct a grand cathedral on the site of the former market. The building's design was a deliberate attempt to overwrite the legacy of human suffering. The high altar of Christ Church Cathedral was placed directly over the whipping post. The font, where new converts are baptized, was situated where the slave auction block once stood. Beneath the cathedral, the dark, damp holding cells have been preserved as a museum. These low-ceilinged stone chambers serve as a somber monument to the millions who suffered. Today, visitors walk through the shadows of the cells, reflecting on the horrors of the past. The cathedral stands as a symbol of hope and a reminder of the fight for human dignity. The story of the Zanzibar slave market is a reminder of how trade can shape the destiny of nations. Thank you for watching this documentary on Unshackled history. To explore more hidden chapters of global history, click on the video appearing on your screen now. Don't forget to subscribe and let us know your thoughts on this history in the comments below. Until next time, keep exploring and stay unshackled.